Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly excited to have you here today because we're about to dive into one of history's most famous and captivating mysteries. We're going to explore the story of the RMS Titanic, but not just as some dusty list of dates. Instead, we're taking a rich, ultra-realistic look at the actual environmental conditions, the tech of the era, and the documented evidence. We're going to piece together exactly what happened on that tragic maiden voyage. So get ready to step back in time to April 1912.
Right off the bat, I want you to picture this scene. It's the North Atlantic at night. There's no modern tech out here, no smartphones, nothing. Just this absolutely enormous, magnificent ship moving slowly through a freezing, pitch-black ocean. The sky above is cloudy, pierced by just a tiny bit of moonlight. Steam is steadily pouring out of those massive funnels, and you've got this warm, glowing light spilling out from hundreds of windows. It's quiet, it's kind of eerie, and it really sets the stage for just how insanely isolated the Titanic actually was out there in the dark.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the maiden voyage, April 10th, 1912.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the incredible contrast going on. During its departure from Southampton, the energy was just absolutely electric. You had thousands of people swarming the harbor, surrounded by steam engines, waving goodbye, totally filled with optimism. I mean, this felt like the absolute pinnacle of early 20th century human engineering. Inside the ship, it's pure opulence. We're talking grand, sweeping staircases, luxurious dining rooms, warm lights, and passengers who felt completely safe. But literally right on the other side of that thin steel hull, the harsh, brutal reality of nature, a freezing, dark ocean, and the totally unforgiving North Atlantic. Keeping that wild juxtaposition in mind is absolutely crucial for understanding how the rest of this voyage unfolded.
Moving on to Section 2, Collision in the Dark, looking specifically at the ice warnings.
So the reality here is actually way more terrifying than any Hollywood exaggeration. Throughout the evening, tension was quietly building down in the Titanic's wireless room. Operators were using this really early telegraph tech to receive handwritten warnings about ice up ahead. Up on the bridge, the officers knew about these warnings, but the massive ship just kept pushing forward. Now look at the conditions at 11:30 p.m. The ocean is unusually calm, which, believe it or not, is actually a massive problem. Without waves crashing against an iceberg, it becomes almost invisible. Plus, it's pitch dark with almost zero moonlight. Moments later, this giant mountain of ice just emerges right out of the darkness. The lookouts spot it, the officers desperately try to change course, but the physics of a ship that big, moving that fast, it's just unforgiving. It grazes the iceberg. Just cold, hard, realistic physics at play.
Which brings us to Section 3, evacuation and final hours, and that terrifying moment of realization.
As freezing water starts flooding into the damaged sections of the ship, engineers and crew members rush down to inspect it. And when the officers actually study this damage, the realization hits them like a ton of bricks. They are in an extremely dangerous, fatal situation. And walking through the evacuation sequence is just heartbreaking. First, the crew works urgently to prepare. Up top, passengers start gathering on the freezing upper decks in their heavy 1912 clothing, but a lot of them are super hesitant. They just don't grasp the severity of what's happening. Then, the lifeboats are lowered, with families saying these incredibly emotional but respectful goodbyes. And finally, back down in the wireless room, operators are frantically tapping out Morse code distress signals. Another ship, the RMS Carpathia, actually gets the emergency communication and immediately changes course to help, but they are miles and miles away in the dark.
As the clock ticks past midnight into April 15th, the massive ship goes increasingly dark and gradually disappears into the icy North Atlantic. If you picture it from a respectful distance, with just the lifeboats drifting away under the stars, the immense ocean simply swallows this engineering marvel whole. And then, the ocean becomes profoundly quiet. The visual of the enormous ship fading into total darkness is a really haunting reminder of the sheer scale of the event.
Next up is Section 4, the tragic aftermath, focusing on the rescue and the immense loss.
When dawn finally broke over the freezing water, the lifeboats were left drifting totally alone across the vast ocean. Eventually, the Carpathia arrived, and the exhausted, grieving survivors were brought aboard. But the reality is, more than 1,500 people lost their lives. We really don't need graphic imagery or explicit details to understand the weight of this tragedy. That singular, massive number represents an incalculable loss of life, families forever changed, and a profound global shock that literally reshaped maritime history forever.
Okay, let's dive into Section 5, investigating myths and reality, getting to the bottom of the great mystery. So we have to pivot now from recounting the story to a factual investigation. By looking at historical photographs, navigation maps, and the ship's actual blueprints, we can start to answer the burning questions that have fueled over a century of debate. Let's start with the first major question historians always ask. Why was the Titanic traveling so quickly? We know the wireless operators were getting handwritten warnings about ice, right? Yet the ship maintained a really high rate of speed right through a known danger zone. Understanding the intense pressure they were under to keep a strict schedule, combined with the major overconfidence of the era, is absolutely key to answering this.
Here's another crucial question. Why was the iceberg spotted so late? Well, this goes right back directly to the environmental conditions we talked about earlier. The ocean was completely flat and calm. There was no moonlight. Without the white water of waves breaking against the base of the iceberg, the lookouts literally had absolutely no visual cues until the massive object emerged from the dark. They were left with almost zero reaction time. Then, of course, there's the most tragic logistical question: why were there not enough lifeboats for everyone? Here is a staggering fact. It wasn't an accident of the ship's design. The legal lifeboat capacity regulations back in 1912 were dangerously outdated and based entirely on the tonnage of the ship rather than how many human beings were actually on board. And finally, perhaps the most agonizing question of the night: why did some lifeboats leave with empty seats? This comes down to that deep confusion and hesitation we noted during the evacuation. Think about it. Many passengers felt significantly safer standing on the gigantic, seemingly unsinkable ship than they did getting lowered into a tiny wooden boat in the pitch-black, freezing ocean. That hesitation, mixed with the chaotic initial organization, led to several boats being launched partially empty.
So the crucial point is this: when we sweep away the famous myths and popular conspiracy theories, which simply aren't supported by reliable evidence, we are left with documented historical facts. The disaster was basically a perfect storm of terrible visibility and calm conditions, excessive speed, fatally flawed legal capacity laws, communication delays, and human error during the evacuation. It is the combination of these very real, documented factors that caused the tragedy. Not a curse, not a grand conspiracy, but a tragic chain of realities.
And the ultimate proof of these facts lies at the bottom of the ocean. Imagine transitioning from the surface, descending slowly through thousands of meters of dark, crushing water, to finally reveal the broken bow of the Titanic, resting silently on the ocean floor. Modern realistic underwater exploration lets us view the deep-sea environment where the physical remains of that night still sit today. It is a deeply mysterious, yet highly respectful resting place that really grounds all of our historical documents in stark physical reality.
Which perfectly leads us to our final thought. As the sun rises over a calm Atlantic Ocean today, more than a century later, we are left with this truth: some stories never disappear. The story of the Titanic continues to fascinate the world because it's the ultimate intersection of incredible human ambition, genuine hubris, and the unrelenting power of nature. So what do you take away from this enduring mystery? I really hope this structured look at the historical realities give you a much deeper understanding of that fateful night. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking questions.